Okay, so Ling, you said.
Mm.
Okay, good. Do you want to tell me a bit about yourself? Like what your interests are? Is this your first semester at the UDM? Anything at
I'm a student exchange. I come from China.
Mhm.
Yes, I first learn in University of Beijing.
Yeah.
I get here to learn French.
Okay.
Yes, my major is French.
Interesting.
But I also want to learn some courses of another language, so I choose this course. And the content of this course interests me, so yes, also I get it. So it's
Good. That's awesome. Did you have? Yeah, you have access to the studio and
Yes.
all of that. Fantastic. So, did you do the work for this week?
Hmm?
Did you do the work for this week, like the reading? You didn't have to read all of this, but I.
Oh yes, I haven't. I had done these things.
Okay, good. So Hi, and good morning.
Sorry, I'm like
No, it's fine.
1 minute. I like power walked.
Yeah, it's all good.
I'm not used to the city.
No, don't worry about it. It can be a confusing city.
I had to move my car from one side of the road to the other.
Because you have a car.
But I forgot, so I walked back to my place to then walk again to school, and it's a 30-minute walk. So that's it. Yeah,
well, clearly have parking here. We don't.
That's it. Yeah.
At least you made it on time.
I know, but I'm like.
In and of itself.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
No, it's all good. It's all good. We literally just started. Ling was introducing himself.
Hi.
Nice
Hello.
to meet you.
Nice to
I'm
meet you.
Leo.
Leo.
Leonie.
You can call me Ling.
Ling?
Ling, yes.
Perfect.
Yeah. Alicia.
Okay.
Good.
Hi.
And of course,
Nice to meet you.
I'm Patrick. You can just call me Patrick. Professor Aura is too formal and it's inaccurate. I'm not formally a professor. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so by the way, Ling, just so you know, if you do just a few admin stuff that I covered a little bit last week, but I think is important. One, because we're so few in the class, right? We're 3, maybe 4 max. You were the 4th person.
Okay.
So, yeah. If you do need to miss class, right, which happens, right? People have other things that happens in life, or maybe you're just sick, whatever reason, right? Just let me know,
okay,
right? Because if there are too many people who cannot come one week, we just won't have class, right? Like it doesn't make sense for me to come for one person, right, or something like that. So, just let me know as much as possible. Okay. However, you should also know I do actually record all of our classes. Okay, not for any like monetary gain or anything like that. I do it so that if any one person misses a class, they can always listen back to it. Or even if you were there and missed something or wanted to hear something again, it's all available. Okay, so just know. Right, that is a pedagogical thing that we can do. Right. Okay, so last week we kind of did a rapid fire pre-18th century overview of just different ways in which writers and society as a whole kind of engaged with different levels of changing environments or just the environment in and of itself. Yeah. So I'm just opening up my notes here slowly but surely. It's 8:30 a.m. for me too. Yeah. And so we covered things like Oedipus Rex, and how certain Greek writers and thinkers conceived of the gods in very environmentally minded ways, right? So associating them with these overwhelming forces of nature like thunder and storms, right? And it got us thinking about how these notions that we have, right, of the planet as this entity in and of itself, right, is not new. Right? What is new is our active engagement with it on a theoretical basis, right? And we even talked a little bit about Shakespeare, because why not, right? It's always a fun time to talk about that. And of course, today we're going to be, I guess, more formally beginning, right, with the Romantics. Right? Romantics, very broadly speaking, right? The Romantics are a very, very large movement in literature that cover anything from Jane Austen, right, who's technically a Romantic, to Mary Shelley, to John Clare, to, of course, the poets that I asked you to read for today, right, William Blake and Percy Shelley, right? I don't, yeah, you read them? Okay, good. And yeah, Alicia and Vianney, you managed to read them?
I read them last week, so I'll have to go over them quickly.
I was planning on reading them out loud anyway for the class because, we'll get to why, but in short, most poetry before the 21st century was meant to be read out loud, right? So if ever you want to get like an extra layer of meaning for most old poetry, always take a shot and read it out loud, and you'll probably get like some musicality out of it. So, which one of you is taking the Jane's poetry class again? Sue? That's a surefire way of getting something in that class.
Yeah, well, poetry, I'm pretty dense about it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Even if I'm taking the class, sometimes I'm just like.
Well, are you reading anything in particular?
It began yesterday, so I haven't checked what we're going to be reading. Okay. Pretty much a lot of things.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think Jane is more modernism than anything else.
Well, she teaches both classes.
Yeah.
Modernism and poetry.
Yeah, but her interest of poetry is modernism, so you might focus on that too.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So basically what I was planning on doing this morning, how I was planning on organizing it, I wanted to start off with just a quick overview of what exactly we mean by Romanticism and why I decided to start our first official literary delving, right, with them. It's kind of arbitrary, but not super arbitrary, right? And then, depending on how long that takes, maybe take a quick break, get a coffee, and come back and do Blake and Shelley. Right? Wonderful. So, what exactly do we know about the Romantics? Just to give me like some sense, right, of where to go with this, right? Is there anything that we heard of them or know of them? It's fine if the answer is nothing at all, right? I'm just curious. Yeah.
I feel like I don't know much, but then when we start talking about stuff, I'm not really good with the vocabulary of literature. Sure. Like, it's pretty new to me. So if you say Romanticism, I'm like, well, I'm not sure.
Okay.
It's an era of literature that like most people wrote at the time that were resembling. But to me, it's kind of how they see society, but like they put a lens on it, and it's prettier than it's supposed to be. Like they kind of make it more fun, less natural, more like, oh, this is what it was, but also not really. To me, that's kind of it, because it's not that happy. It's not that nice, actually, society at the time, but they make it nicer. Or that's how I see it anyway in Jane Austen.
Yeah, okay, so you're thinking of Jane Austen.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Jane Austen specifically because that's one of
ones you know.
I read, but there's others. I don't know if we can count Charlotte Bronte and Emily Bronte in that kind of era.
Probably, yeah.
But they were darker.
Yeah.
They
Wuthering Heights.
Yeah. Okay. But it's not really about romance, but it is. But it's not exactly that.
Yeah, that's
hard to explain because the title is Romanticism. You would think it's about romance, and there are, but it's not just that, because Emily Bronte is.
The Brontes would be like very late Romanticism.
They're very much Gothic.
Yeah, so Charlotte herself was born at the tail end of the Romantic era, right? Like Frankenstein was published the same year as Bronte was born. Okay. Right. So, or more or less. But
more or less.
So if she is considered a romantic, it's like very late Romanticism. into more Victorianism.
And it's like, it's probably more that she took some part of Romanticism and also some part of other eras, because since she arrived so late, she still had a part of it, but not exactly. Anyway, that's pretty much how I see it.
Good.
Again,
that's good that she took a part of Romanticism. There have been critical perspectives that have said that we've never really fully come out of Romanticism, right, as a movement, despite the fact that modernists of the 20th century and post-World War I have wanted to actively break with the ideals of Romanticism. I think there's a good argument to be made that they never quite succeeded in it. And you might get a sense of that here. That's not the point of today's class, to actually dunk on the modernists. But it might be something that you can think of, certainly. Ling, did you have anything that you wanted to add on that? Like what you know about Romantics, if anything?
For me, to say about Romantics, it reminds me of some artists like Rousseau.
Yes.
Rousseau.
Good.
I think it's just a style or form of art, or like literature or drawing.
Yeah.
I think compared to how to say realism.
Yes.
Is realism. It's a very different form. It's beyond. Sorry, I can't say that, but I think it's beyond the beyond the reality.
Yeah.
The reality. It's more about the imagination and yes, it's the good imagination of people. It's just not about love. It how to say? I forget.
Take your time. It's fine. We're in no rush.
It includes many fields. Yes.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, these are all really good places to begin. Broadly speaking, even though Blake is a little bit before that, right? A lot of people consider Blake like proto-romantic, right? A lot of people see the beginning of Romanticism with the publication of lyrical ballads, right? By William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, right? Who are names that even if you haven't read before, I'm sure you've heard those names. I hope, at least on some level. So Lyrical Ballads was published in 1798. I had to check that up just to make sure before I said something completely silly. 1798, Lyrical Ballads was published. And in it, there is a kind of manifesto, if you will. They don't call it a manifesto because the term wasn't really in use at the time. But it's just the preface to the book. And Wordsworth and Coleridge, in that preface, really emphasize the fact that this is a style of literature and poetry that, yes, kind of eschews realism, like you're saying, Ling. It's kind of in part a rejection of it and an embrace of just imagination and just the beauty of the world around us, right? So on one hand, that is absolutely what they're going for. But, and here's a kind of double-edged sword with Romanticism, at least for Wordsworth and Coleridge, what they really wanted to do was start using ordinary language again, right? This was meant to be poetry for the people, so to speak, okay? Especially at a time when a lot of people couldn't read, right? And so, as I mentioned earlier, we're kind of left listening to poetry, right? Or hearing poetry from someone else, right? Or simply telling each other stories in a poetic fashion, right? That was how most people would have engaged with poetry if they engaged with it at all, right? And so there is a kind of realism that's inherent to romantic poetry, right? Insofar as they're getting at the beauty of everyday life,
yes,
right? But also, and this is, I think, key to our class in particular, how that beauty is being actively torn asunder, right, at this time, right? The late 18th century was a time of great change, right, in society in a lot of ways, politically, socially, environmentally, right? And this is something that I'll talk a little bit more about. I don't expect you to just obviously know this off the top of your head, but this is something that the Romantics really, really are interested in, right? Is these changes. And so a surefire way of reading Romantic poetry, right, whether it's first generation poets like Wordsworth, Coleridge, Keats, who I have here, but we're not reading for today, right, Keats, etc., and maybe a bit John Clare, but Blake certainly, as well as second generation poets like the Shelleys, right? They're really interested in this everyday life and these changes, right? That is, if you can read anything through that lens, it's Romantic poetry. Okay? And you can start to see why some people say also, why am I getting this notification right now? No, go away, Norton. You can start to see why people say also that we've kind of never escaped that, right? Literarily speaking, that's kind of what the modernists wanted to do as well, right? They just felt that the Romantics no longer respected that, and so they kind of tried to move away from that by doing what the Romantics had initially said that they were going to do, right? So it's kind of coming full circle back to that again. A lot of contemporary poetry deals with those issues as well, but obviously on a different register. But the basic drive, right, of using regular everyday language and putting it in a poetic way in order to understand why the world is the way that it is right now, right, for good and bad, right, is still with us today, right, whether it's novels or poems, etc. Does that make sense? So far as a very introductory jet into how we can understand Romanticism?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, okay. This is I said in 8 minutes what can really be a full hour of discussion of what Romanticism is.
Some people spend an entire class on it.
Some people spend careers on trying to have spent careers on trying to understand what Romanticism is, right? And that's kind of the beauty of it, right? Is that it still offers a lot to unpack. Okay. So yeah, even though it's not my area of expertise, so to speak, right? Romanticism, it is one of those poems that, on a personal level, I always find something interesting to come back to over and over again. There's just something about it that even at their worst, they're still really interesting to engage with, right? On a poetic level, I mean, right? So even the later Wordsworth, who kind of leaves behind his radical politics that made some of his early poems so interesting, he kind of leaves that and decides to make poetry about why people shouldn't vote anonymously, which is awful, right? It's just boring. But even poetically, right, it's still kind of interesting to read through it on a formalistic level, right? So there's always something there, right, that you can kind of unpack. Right? Okay. So I guess I'll stop talking for a half a second, right, and throw the question back to you, right? So I mentioned that a lot of Romantics were responding to social, political, and environmental changes, right, that were happening at the time, right? So think back to your history classes, right? What kind of changes might those be, right? And you mentioned Rousseau was also responding a lot to some of those changes, right? And is arguably an instigator of a lot of those changes as well. So what kind of changes might those be, right? So end of the 18th century, right? For example, Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience comes out in 1789, right?
Wasn't there a revolution at the time?
Just one?
Oh, more than one. I mean, the French are pretty into revolution.
Yeah. So French Revolution. We're gonna go old school with this one. Yeah. I like that we're in a smaller class, but the disadvantage is that we have no projector. So yeah, French Revolution. When did that happen?
I'm thinking 1783 or
a little bit later.
So 85.
A little bit later.
89.
Bingo.
Thank you.
1789.
Yes.
Right when someone published Songs of Innocence.
Okay.
Right. Now, Songs of Innocence wasn't a direct response to the French Revolution specifically, right? But Blake later on would 100% be an active engager with the politics of the French Revolution, right? And a lot of the Romantics would. Blake was a great admirer of the French Revolution, right, for what it represented.
Yeah.
Okay? He even wrote a long poem about it that I would argue actually influenced Karl Marx later, right, in its language. But that's another question entirely. But very influential poem, I would say, on the French Revolution. So yeah, that's definitely one thing that has a huge impact on people, right? Wordsworth himself was in France when the revolution was happening, right? And that would actually be one of the things that pushed him away from radical politics was the aftermath of the French Revolution, right? When it transitioned into, yeah, exactly. Well, obviously any revolution by definition is violent, but the terror itself, right, that came after, is what slowly started to push Wordsworth away from it, right? Funny enough, it started to push Shelley further into radical politics, right? Shelley himself was like, no, actually, this is pretty dope. Wordsworth took the opposite view. And that was actually one of the reasons why they kind of started to drift apart. They broadly knew each other, even though they were different generations. But yeah, so the French Revolution, right? Great influence, right, on the time. And for many people, it would very much be a representation of the 18th century, right? There were, of course, revolutions before, right? Such as the American Revolution, naturally. But a lot of people saw the French Revolution as being fundamentally different, right, than the American Revolution. The American Revolution, for a lot of people, was a national revolution, right? And at the end of the day, it did change certain things, but a lot of American society remained very similar to British society, except without a king, right? With a president instead, right? But a lot of actually the fundamentals of American society and American politics didn't change that much, right? At least in people's minds at the time. You can argue how true that is or not, but and when they compare it to something like the French Revolution, where we're executing, right, people, right, in the great equalizer, so to speak, right, everyone's equal. And that also means that everyone has an equal chance of seeing the guillotine, right? And so there is that kind of radicality that comes with it. The French Revolution abolishes slavery, right? Which, of course, the American Revolution did not. It would take them another 100 years to realize that was wrong, right? So there's all kinds of differences, right, between the French and American Revolution that make it so that in people's minds, the French Revolution was a much more, I don't want to keep using the word radical, but severe, I guess, would be a better term, break with previous politics, right?
Yes.
And of course, right, you can see that in the reaction that people had to the French Revolution, right? Yes, there were some people that disagreed with the American Revolution, right, on fundamental principles, the British, namely, did not like the fact that their greatest colony kind of seceded. But the French Revolution literally caused the rest of Europe to get scared. Yeah, exactly, and band together. Good. Yeah, they banded together and tried to invade France, right, as they were going through a revolution, right? And I would argue that still today, the imaginary of the French Revolution is really important to how we understand how revolutions take place, right? Both the myths and the realities of the French Revolution, right? We brought up the Soviet Union last week, very briefly, that was influenced a lot in its rhetoric, right, on the French Revolution. Right? Didn't quite end up the same way necessarily, or maybe it did. We'll see. But right, the basic gist, right, of the rhetoric, you can see that even 150 years later, it very much had an influence on how people perceive changes in society. Right? Okay, so good. So the French Revolution is one of them. When we brought up the American one, when does the American Revolution take place?
So I would think later or earlier.
It is earlier, not that much earlier.
Isn't it like 83?
85 or 83?
So the
77?
Declaration of Independence would have been in the 80s. The formalization of the country would have been in the 80s, but the revolution started.
So 70. I thought it was 77.
So the Declaration itself is in 1776. Yeah, good. Doesn't really matter, right? But the point is that within less than a decade, right, you have these two major events that happen.
That makes sense because the French helped the Americans get their independence, so that makes sense to me that they were before.
Arguably, it's because the French helped the Americans, right? It kind of put them more into debt, and they hated their monarchy that much more, right? And so the people kind of rose up against that. Good. So that's, we'll say, politically what's happening. And, a lot of, you brought up Rousseau, a lot of those revolutions, a lot of the people who were like thinkers of the revolution actively took from Rousseau, right? Who was writing like 100 years earlier or so. Oof, this is my philosophy history that's maybe a bit further away. But right, about 100 years earlier, was writing these, and finally these ideas kind of get into society as a whole. Okay. I guess you can say socially also, this had a huge influence, right? Like we said, kind of great equalizer, so to speak. But there's another social factor that's really emerging around this time. Right? The Americans would really grab onto it, right? Still to this day. I say social, it's also an economic factor.
Is it like the Industrial Revolution? Well, not revolution, but
yeah, I would say it is. Yeah,
or the train and everything.
Yeah, the train. Yeah, good. Right. Industrial Revolution. Right. I think revolution is a good term here. Not the same revolution as the French or American. Right. It's not.
Not evolution. It's like. It's getting more modern.
Yeah, for sure.
To set up the capitalism.
Yes, good. Modernity and we'll say capitalism. Now, there has been a lot of ink spilled about what the origins of modernity and capitalism are, right? I'm not here to solve that debate today, right? Certainly, what we can say is that by this point, it's really coming full swing, right? We talked a little bit about this last week with the advent of colonialism, right? That's kind of depicted in things like The Tempest or other works of the 16th, 17th century, right? You kind of see that what we would now call capitalist modernity is emerging, right? But really with the Industrial Revolution, right? That's really when we see the establishment of it as the norm.
Yeah.
Right? So these are all really good. I sat down, but I have more to write on this blackboard. Is there anything else that we want to add here before I continue? Right? About any other changes that we can think of? There's one more that I want to add, but I'm curious if you have anything that you want to say. I'm going to stick to, I guess, this broadly.
Well, that brings a new, how does it say? It's social category.
Good.
Workers.
Yeah.
It's like
yeah. So good.
Not exactly middle class, because middle class are the people that have the industries.
Yeah. Good. So. Okay.
But like
working class.
Working class. Yeah.
So new classes. Good. So we have.
So that changes. Yeah, the hierarchy.
Right. Instead of kings. Right.
Yeah.
We have the bourgeoisie instead. Right. Basically kings, but without like the royal blood that supposedly comes with it.
Yeah.
Right. So bourgeois, and we can say broadly speaking, working class. Okay. The last point I wanted to bring up was actually in relation to this. Right? So this is really good that we brought this up. Okay. One of the major things that would have a profound influence on the Romantics specifically, right, which is why all of this matters, right, is that with the Industrial Revolution, right, comes, right, in part, people who are forced into factories, right? But how do you actually get populations to do that, right? For centuries, right, millennia, people lived off of the land, right? We've been farming as humans for 20,000 years, 30,000? I don't know. When did agriculture start? Like 10,000 BC, something like that, right? A really long time ago, right? So how do you get people who lived for thousands of years off of the land, right? With all its problems, it wasn't a perfect system, but that was the situation, right? To suddenly feel like they are forced into factory work, right? That does create these divisions between bourgeois and working class, right? The factory owners, so to speak, and the people who work in the factories. Does anyone know?
I just know England.
Yeah.
There's a campaign of enclosure.
Good. Yes. It is fantastic.
It forced the farmers to get to the industry. Yes.
Good. How do you force that? Right. What does enclosure actually entail as a concept?
I don't know many details about that because I learned it many years before.
So, how do you force someone off their land? Right. And this is going to be an awful drawing, right? I don't know if it's actually going to work. Violence, right? It's a sword. It's supposed to be a sword.
I see it.
Okay, I just saw that.
Yeah. Obviously, a gun didn't. Well, there were guns at the time, but you didn't do it at gunpoint. You do it at sword point, so to speak. So you force them off of it through violence, right? During one of the things that we tend to forget about pre-modernity, right, in England or in a lot of places around the world, right, is that we had something, I guess you can put it here, right, we had what we called the commons, right, commons literally, right, common land, right, so yes, there was land owned by the lord or a king or whoever, right, that people worked on for the benefit of the king. But something that we tend to forget is that there was also common land that was not owned by anyone in particular. Yeah, exactly. It was owned by everyone, right? You could do with it what you will. Usually people used it for their subsistence, right? Their own needs. Okay? And this is where, when we talk about enclosure, right, we're talking about the closing off of these lands, right? People coming in, right, usually what we now call the bourgeoisie, right, who have the money to pay mercenaries, who have the money to pay soldiers, right, and say, okay, well, now you block off the common lands. I'm taking over the common lands, right? What are you going to do about it, right? You have nothing, right? You have a shovel, right? What is that going to do against a literal army, right? This is obviously oversimplifying it for the sake of history, right? But that's basically like what's happening at this time, right? There are a series of laws and measures that make it so that what used to be common land, right, owned by average peasants, right, if you want to use that term, is slowly privatized, right? That's a term that we're much more familiar with today, right? Is privatization, right? It comes up every so often in the news, right? Whenever some public work is decided to be privatized, right? But it's the same idea, right? With the Enclosure Act, it's just with land. Right? And so, if there's one thing that you retain from this kind of like 25-minute rant that I've been going on, right? It's that, right? There are these changes that happen on an economic and social level that also happen on a literally land level or environmental level, right? And of course, right, that is intrinsic to how we understand capitalist modernity today, right? It's the private ownership of, certain aspects, right, that used to be common. Now, again, I'm not here to like debate the merits of that, whether that's good, bad, ugly, right? I have my own opinions about it that you can probably guess, right, from the way I'm talking, right? But whether we like it or not, that is kind of how the trajectory of history was kind of going at this point,
Yes.
right? So, why does this matter to literature, right? I brought up earlier the fact that a lot of poets, right, like Wordsworth and Coleridge and Blake, right, were alive at this time, right? These were changes that they were seeing with their own eyes, right? I think was it last week I gave the example of Hydro-Quebec? Maybe it was in a different class. Yeah. Okay. Great. So it would be technically Hydro-Quebec is right a public service, right? It would be like if in our lifetime we physically saw with our own eyes just the piecemeal sale of Hydro-Quebec just for some soulless company, right? Which it kind of is already, but whatever, right? You get what I mean. Or a park, right? A public park, right? Slowly being turned into a condo, right? Development. Right? So imagine that, right? If they turned Parc Jarry or whatever, Bac La Fontaine, slowly into individually owned apartment complexes and just like, a store and a parking lot, right? That's kind of what's happening, but on a mass scale, right? And that's really what is forcing in people's minds the reality of this situation, right? And there is resistance to it, right? I don't want to sit here and say like nobody did anything about it, right? Except write beautiful poetry, right? That people did more than that. But kind of history ended up in a way that made it so those changes kind of became permanent, right? And you can see a lot of Romantic poetry actively channeling this desire to speak for the people who are having their voices kind of removed at this time, right? The really good example that I have, I guess we can use that example, but it's not technically related to Enclosure. I'll use an example with Enclosure and another example that's not related to Enclosure, right? One of the poets that is best known at this time is a man called John Clare, right? If you want to look into him, he's really beautiful as a poet. John, written John, and Clare, Clare. He was actually a farmer, right? And he would have seen firsthand, right, a lot of these enclosures, right? Unlike Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Shelley, who lived in relatively away from this situation, right? Clare was actually someone who lived through this, and a lot of his poetry talks about this, right, explicitly or implicitly. And so that's a really good example of how that happens. How many of you here have read Frankenstein? Right, you have?
Yeah.
Have you read Frankenstein? No.
I'm reading it for another class.
Okay, reading fiction?
Yeah.
Yeah, she always does it for reading fiction. Have you read Frankenstein? Mary Shelley's?
Frankenstein? I don't remember. Maybe no.
Okay, that's fine. Right. At the time, right, it just as another good example of how a lot of these writers were responding to environmental changes, right? This is something I'm sure you'll talk about in your reading fiction class, or if you don't, you can bring it up and it'll like blow Heather's mind. Right. There was that year a volcano that erupted, right? And it caused like massive environmental switches, right? It was a volcano that erupted in what we now call Indonesia. Yeah. And it was such a big eruption that it literally changed atmospheric pressures for a bit, right? And caused like rains and what we call
change also the land.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Good. Yes. Right. So it changed the land because there was less sun. Like, and we're talking across the world, right? Like England called it the year without a summer, right? Because the sun was kind of blocked out. There was a lot of like acid rain, what we'd call today like acid rain, and it impacted farmland, right?
Yes.
So Shelley, right, Mary Shelley, I should say, was seeing not only enclosures happening, right, but also the literal destruction, right? In this case, it's the planet that's kind of reacting in this case, right? And what you see, right, in a really interesting manner is how Mary would have been writing Frankenstein right around the time where she would have also witnessed in real life hordes of kind of hungry and poor farmers leaving their land towards the cities, right? Almost in a zombie-like fashion, right? And it's not kind of difficult to see how that would have influenced what she put into Frankenstein, right? A literal dead body being reanimated, right? And engaging with a world that is slowly being turned into a monster of its former self, right? Now, I don't want to be entirely depressing in this class because I felt like I was depressing enough last class, right? But this is like part of the grounding, right? That does influence a lot of the Romantics. Now, one of the things that Romantics are particularly interested in, right, as they're seeing these ostensibly horrible things happening, is how do we find the magic again, right? And I mean this in the literal sense, right, of we once saw the world as a magical place, right? We kind of saw that a little bit last week, right, with the example of Oedipus that we gave. But you can see this in Celtic traditions, in indigenous traditions, in all kinds of indigenous African traditions, right? You can go on and on and on, right? Of seeing the world and the environment and nature as an inherently magical space, right? And when I say magic, I mean I mean in the sense of providing something beyond of our mere human understanding, right? It is a force outside of itself that some people called religion, right? And other people call simply magic, right? In the purest and non-negative sense of irrational, right? There is something that just doesn't make Rousseauian sense, right, of rationality, right? To come back to Rousseau. There's something that goes beyond the mind, right, and into the purely beautiful and magical, right? And as such a magic is being lost, right, through the enclosure and dissociation of people from the land, right, poetry comes in and is like, how about we try to find that magic again through poetry? Okay. See, I promised I'd bring it back to the Romantics and poetry, right? It's not just the ramblings of a madman, right? And I actually, I wrote down a poem here. No, I didn't write down a poem. I noted a poem. I did not write this poem. That I think is a really good depiction of how the average person would have seen the enclosures happening, right? And what exactly Romantic poets were responding to, right, on an environmental level, okay, and a social level. Actually, do we want me to read it, or do you want y'all to read it? Like, it's 4 stanzas. How do we? Should we read 1 stanza each?
Yeah.
Right, we're 4
Sure.
people. We can read 1 stanza each. So it's literally right this one here. Okay, so I'll read the first stanza, and then we'll kind of like pass it around, and you can each read a stanza. Okay. So this is called The Goose in the Common. Right. Hint, hint. Why I took it, right? The common. The law locks up the man or woman who steals the goose from off the common, but leaves the greater villain loose who steals the common from the goose. There you go.
The law demands that we atone when we take things we do not own, but leaves the lords and ladies fine who take things that are yours and mine.
The poor and wretched don't escape. If they conspire the law to break, this must be so, but they endure. Those who conspire to make the law.
Clicking on so much things.
It's like when it's flipped over, it shouldn't.
Oh, thank God. The law locks up the man or woman who steals the goose from of the common, and geese will steal a common lock till they go and steal it back.
Right. Good, thank you. So a little ditty, basically, right? That was written at the time. It's not a grand poem as we would understand it today, but it still gets at that right sense of what we're talking about with the enclosure of the commons, right? Where the use of what used to be common property is now privatized. That's basically what they're saying here. And again, another very common argument that you hear today: the people who are actually stealing, right, are not being punished for it. Mm-hmm. Okay, now we've been talking for about 50 minutes at this point, which is fine. Does anyone have any particular questions before we kind of like formally move into the Romantics? Right? Is there anything that's unclear or that we want to add or doesn't make sense? I guess if there's one way that we understand, that we can understand Romanticism, and this is a very modern term that's being used. I'm going to erase this horrible sword so that no one remembers. This is a very modern term and a theoretical one that was developed by a Cameroonian thinker called Shelley, who uses the term disenclosure, right? For him as a political practice, right? And as a social practice. He's a political theorist at the end of the day. And obviously the use of the word dis in this case is meant to render negative what is already a negative term, right? Therefore kind of imbuing it with a kind of political action, so to speak, or powerful action. And we can, I guess, kind of see a lot of Romantic poetry, not all of it, but a lot of it, as a kind of act in disenclosure, right? Through, right, like I said, I'm just writing down here in a simple way what we've already talked about, right? Through the common people or through the perspective of common people, through a making magic again, and through their own radical politics. which I'll talk a little bit about later. All right. So what do we want to do? Do we want to keep going? Do we want to take a quick break and get a coffee? What are we feeling?
I'd go get a coffee.
You'd go get a coffee?
Yeah,
okay.
But I can also wait.
Yeah, that's fine.
You take it off.
Because, like I said last week, usually I do 50-10, 50-10 as a kind of break format, right? Just so we're not too overloaded by anything. So, yeah, come back at 9:30, right? And we'll pick back up. Okay? So it depends. I don't know if it's open. It's cheap. It's 75 cents for a coffee. On the third floor, there's the Café Entrepôt, what they call. It's exactly what you'd expect for 75 cents, but it's coffee, right? If not, on the second floor, there's the cafeteria that will.
Where you come from, but compared to.
I mean, he said it come from China.
Yeah.
The way.
The language
structure
is so different.
It's very different.
Yeah.
So
it's fairly difficult to learn. Yes. So I get here to get environmental states. Yes.
Yeah. Well, you're doing it. Good for you.
Yeah. Good luck. Grammar. It's horrifying.
Oh man. I still couldn't explain most of the grammar rules in French, to be perfectly honest, and it's my first language.
Yeah.
So.
The only way I could do it was just reading a lot in French, and I just copied what I saw.
Yeah.
That's how you learn.
Now I'm really into languages. Yeah, I almost taught French instead of English when I started my education degree.
Oh, cool.
So I'm really grammar is my thing.
Nice.
At least you understand.
Yeah. Some of my really good friends are French teachers. Yeah.
It's okay. Nobody's perfect. Before I keep going, because I mentioned this last week as it being optional more than anything else. Yeah. Did either of you read the article, the Anne McCarthy article?
I started it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a rough article.
Yeah. Well, it was just very the level of language is kind of challenging to be honest. So I read a few pages.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then,
like I mentioned, the point.
Tried it out.
Yeah, usually the point that I try to make with the nonfiction or the criticism that I include is mostly to offer you a different perspective on certain things, right? So if it's fine if you didn't finish it or anything like that, it's just to add to the vocabulary that you might use in the context of this class.
I did not read it. I just skipped through it just to see because. To be honest, I did not understand that much of the poem, so I was just
poetry is my
of the Mont Blanc poem.
Yeah, so I was
okay.
I understood what he was saying, literally.
Yes.
That's it.
I was this can't be it. So I was just what is this saying about it? Just so I have an idea what this is going to be about. So I checked a little and I was just okay.
Yeah. Sometimes the easiest answer is the correct one. And I think in Mont Blanc's case, it's both the easiest and it's somehow more complicated.
It did literally say, if you just forget about this thing and try to think about that other thing, and I was okay, but if you stop thinking about that thing, don't you just stop thinking about the poem and then just try to find answers you want to see in it?
Well, yes and no. So there is on the... Okay, I was going to ask if we want to start with Mont Blanc or Blake, so might as well just keep going with Mont Blanc. There is something interesting about especially romantic poetry, but poetry in general. And again, this is something that if ever you're taking her class, but if any of you ever take a poetry class, this is going to get you bonus points, I guess, just for flexing on that idea. Where is Mont Blanc actually in this edition? Here we go. This hyper annotated version. So I lied. I thought it was 2 pages long, but I guess in my edition it's a little bit longer just because of the page format. So you said something really interesting about the idea of kind of forgetting that it's poetry and just embracing what is being said, right? Or what is being expressed, right? And you're right. On some level, that does require you to stop analyzing, right? But on another, it says something really crucial about what the Romantic poets are doing, right? And I think that's something that you can really keep in mind, which is that they are masters, or the best Romantic poets are masters at what kids these days call vibe, right? And I mean, and I mean this in a very positive sense. I don't mean this critically, right?
I know.
Right. I'm not saying this to dunk on Jins at all. Vibe can be really cool. I never thought I would actually say, but but what's really interesting is that you kind of embrace the poetry, right? If you let your mind kind of go and just really engage with the sense that you get, right, and the feelings that you get, right, and feelings here as a word I'm choosing particularly, right, thinking back to Wordsworth's preface. He explicitly calls Romantic poetry the spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling, right? That is a quote from that preface. So just embracing the feeling that it gives you, right, is something that can absolutely be productive for Romantic poetry, right? And poetry in general, right? But especially Romantic onward. However, I don't think it's fair to say that requires a ignorance or of letting go of the details of the poetry, right? And it would be rather fair, especially for poetic experts, right, and arguably poetic geniuses like Shelley, right? I don't think it's that much of a hot take to say that he was a poetic genius, or Mary herself, for that matter. To claim that they make the poetry and write the poetry in a way that you want to forget it, right? And just let it embrace you. But that it's an intrinsic part of how the poem is constructed.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is maybe something that we can think through as we read Mont Blanc, right? Is how it actually gets you and lulls you into that sense of forgetting and embracing the feeling, right? And forgetting that you're reading a poem. Okay. But I think that's a really, really interesting perspective.
Well,
right?
it's what was saying in the article. She said you should forget, or he doesn't. I don't know if it's an author. I use the feminine here.
Yes, it's she. Yeah.
But she just said if we forget about Mont Blanc and just see everything else, you kind of forget that it's about a mountain.
Yes, good.
And I was just honestly, especially since it's not even being said until the fourth part.
Yeah, the fourth part and the title.
Yeah. So at first I was just where is this going?
Yes, good. If it's not about the poem, I guess this is question of the day. If it's not about the poem, if the poem is not about, the mountain, what is it about then?
I could give you the answer of the article, but that...
Okay, yes. But you can start with the answer of the article if you want, but I would say that the answer that both of the article and that I'm thinking of personally, although maybe you're thinking of something else, and that's totally fine, will probably tell you a lot about what Romantic poetry tries to do, right? And why it relates to the theme of this class of planetary literature, right? Yeah. So, if not about a mountain, which of course it is, in part, what is it about? We can take a minute to think about it. We're in no rush here. Right? What does the article say, according to you?
Well, I saw that it was about society.
Okay.
Because she, I don't know.
Yes, and
they use a lot of natural imagery.
Yes.
So of course it's about the world, but it's the way it's beautiful.
Yes.
And but not entirely.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it keeps talking about dark secrets, and it's just like there's two kind of facets of it.
Mm-hmm.
Of it, like there's also I don't know where there's a arrival, like
Mm-hmm.
a huge like line
A
between
ravine. Yeah.
two things,
Mm-hmm.
and it just feels like they're talking about how there are always two facets of one thing,
Mm-hmm.
not just humans or society, but nature too.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of goes around that point to me, but
yeah,
I might be forgetting things because I did read it.
Yeah,
once.
a week ago. Yeah. Anyone else wanted to? If not about a mountain, what is it? It's another word that starts with M. Kind of brought up in the bottom. No, I'm not going to write it down. We'll just engage with the vibe. I would say that it's written right in the second line. I think it would be a very productive way of thinking about this poem as we read through it, right? And don't worry, I'm not going to subject you to every single note that I've taken about this poem, right? It would be a very productive way of thinking about this poem as an interaction between the mountain and the mind, right, of the speaker, right? Who's not necessarily Shelley, right? That's something very important to remember with poetry. The writer is not always the speaker, right? Even though it is based off of Shelley's experience. And how, and this is, I guess, a crucial romantic term, how those dynamics are mediated through what we generally call the sublime. Right? Is that a term that we've heard before, sublime?
I feel like yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Does anyone want to take a shot at describing what the sublime is? This famously difficult to describe concept. Yeah. I have an image here that I think kind of gets at what the sublime is, right? And as we know, an image is worth 1,000 words, so might as well just engage with that fully. Oh shoot! Why did it leave? No. Open image in your tab. Good. Right. Usually, when we think of sublime, we think of this image, right? Or an image similar to this. It's like this thing that's really powerful and overwhelming, but we can't quite put our finger on it, right? We just kind of let it wash over us, right? This would be a really important term for a philosopher called Immanuel Kant, right? Who's a peak romantic philosopher. And when Anne uses the term contingency, it comes from Kant in this case. Right? So not quite being able to understand what we're grasping, right? But knowing that there's something there. That's, in a nutshell, the sublime, right? And it's beautiful and yet terrifying, right? And so we can kind of think of it as the mediating aspect between the speaker here and the mountain. Did any of you actually look up what the mountain looks like? What Mont Blanc looks like?
I did.
Yeah. Do you get why he would have written a poem about it after seeing an image of it?
Yeah.
So for those of you who didn't look it up.
I'm looking it up.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay, so that's true. I keep forgetting that you all have computers in front of you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. By the way, this was he wrote this, he saw this on a trip to Mont Blanc and Chamonix that he took with Mary, right? And that would also influence Frankenstein. Right, like both were very much influenced by it. So if you ever read Frankenstein again, at the end, when the monster floats on ice, is it the no, not the monster? Who's floating on ice at the end?
It's been a while.
Anyway, there's shoot. Anyway, there's a whole passage at the end where one of the characters, it's not is it the monster? It doesn't matter.
Maybe it's Frankenstein.
No, I don't think it's Frankenstein. Who's the other character?
His friend?
Yeah.
Walton.
Is it Walton? It might be it's either the creature or Walton, who's floating on the sea of ice, right? And kind of getting lost and submerged in this sense. That was inspired by Mont Blanc as well, right? In her experience of seeing this kind of indescribable thing, right? So I can say more about context, but I think it would be more productive to start with just like reading through the poem together and kind of giving our thoughts and reactions to it as we go, and then just kind of add onto it. Okay. Does anyone want to take a shot at the first stanza, or do you want me to start and then you keep going afterwards? I can start just to break the ice. So to speak. Okay. Sorry, Mont Blanc, lines written in the Vale of Shelley. The everlasting universe of things flows through the mind and rolls its rapid waves, now dark, now glittering, now reflecting gloom, now lending splendor where from secret springs the source of human thought its tribute rings, of waters, with a sound but half its own, such as a feeble brook will oft assume in the wild woods among the mountains lone, where waterfalls around it leap forever, where woods and winds contend, and a vast river over its rocks ceaselessly bursts and raves. What's happening?
Oh, in the poem, sorry.
Yeah, like narratively speaking, what is this? What does this mean in like a sentence? Paraphrase this. We'll get into the formalistic details after. Don't worry, it's not easy. And not all of the stuff we read in this class is going to be this hard. As evidenced by Blake. I think Blake is already a little bit easier. A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, it describes like a river or like water.
Okay, good.
Fluid and water-like.
Yeah. Fluid and water-like, but also the mountain, right? Like, so work your way back, right? This is really good. The water is literally, by the way, the central part, right, of the stanza, right, is literally in the middle, right? And you can think of it, right, in the images that we see of Mont Blanc. The ravine that you mentioned, Alicia, earlier, right, passes right through the middle of the mountain, right? So that's what he's referring to, by the way, this river that's flowing through the mountain, right? But what's he comparing the river to, right, on a more abstract sense? And you can look to the first lines again.
The mind.
Yeah,
or at least how the thoughts pass in the mind.
Good, right? So you see explicitly already this connection that's being made, right, between the majesty of this mountain, right, this thing that's millions of years old, right, indescribably old, right, so old that we literally cannot consider it in our mind, right, like mathematically we can't understand how old that is, right, we understand it only in comparison to other things, right, and in order to get at it, right, he compares it to a river, right, or he gets at it through the river that's flowing into his mind, right, this rushing, beautiful, eternal thing, right, that just gets into the back of his mind, right, like the river is doing to the mountain, right, it's going through it, into it, around it, carving its way through rock, right, through millions and millions of years. Right? And so there's this really interesting parallel going on, right, between both the mind and the river in a way that mirrors the river and the mountain together, right? Does that make sense? Right?
Yeah.
Okay. I love that first line also, by the way. We could spend an entire class on this, and there's a reason why the article kind of pulls on it. The everlasting universe of things. Things is a really powerful word, right? It can mean so much. Yeah. Like literally in Old English, thing meant to place, right? Or that's where it comes from, right? Etymologically speaking, right? Or it also meant like a meeting place, right? And yet it can also mean something as simple as a purple mug, right? That I found in an office one day, right? Like it's a very strange and interesting word to use when describing a mountain, right? And you can probably write an entire essay on it. Hint, hint, right? I'm not saying you actually should, by the way. It would be like a really hard essay to do, but you could do it. But it technically could be something, right? It's one of the notes I have here is that, right, something like everlasting universe of things, right? It's everything that is conceivable, and yet it is utterly impossible. Right? Like by definition, it's impossible to have a thing that's everlasting and not shifting over time. But the definition itself of an everlasting universe is every single atom in existence. Right? That's what is being conceived of in this poem. Right? He sees this mountain emerging, right, after an hours-long hike, and he basically conceives of the universe. Right? Things that you could only get by like dropping acid or something like that. I keep coming back to that, but like don't. Right? But he just kind of engages with it, right, in a way that we rarely see today. Okay. Anything else we notice about this first stanza? We're not going to spend the whole time on the first stanza, but
it's beautiful.
Good.
The way it's written, also it flows.
Yes.
Perfectly.
Good. Why? Think of this on a formal level.
Well, I would say the use of alliteration. I don't know. I think it's more like assonance. But
so, what do you mean? What alliteration?
It's
Where?
Now dark, now glittering, now reflecting, now lending splendor. To me, that flows a lot. Yes. There's no points. No, it's just lines.
Good. Yes.
So that's just like.
Yes.
Like this to me.
Yes.
Especially they use the line, so it's even more like connecting.
Yes.
To each other.
Yeah. You don't have full stop until the very end.
There's not even an exclamation point or anything. It's very calm.
Very calm. I don't think there are any exclamation points at any point in the poem.
I could not remember, but from this one at least.
Okay.
There is one end of the second.
At the end of oh yes, you're right. Yeah, we'll come to that.
Oh yeah.
Right, but you're absolutely right. Or the repetition of where, right? Or the W sound. Where waterfalls around it leap forever, where woods and winds contend, right?
Yeah.
And when you're talking earlier about the poem just kind of letting you forget that it's a poem, right? These are the kinds of formalistic elements that allow that to happen, right? It lulls you into a sense of sleep, right? Or a sense of complacency, right? And yet gets at the majesty of what we're talking about. Good. Very good. Anything else? Oh, and also wild woods, right? We were talking about W's. Yeah, wild woods, waters. Anything else we want to bring up before we move on to stanza 2?
I just want to say about the main mindset of human, because he mentioned the source of human thoughts is trivial dreams.
Good.
So maybe I think the water or the waterfalls is just like the source of human.
Yes.
Yes. They are how to say? They are coming up, and they are they're blooming. It goes like this.
Yes, good. Right? Now lending splendor where from secret springs the source of human thought its tribute brings of waters, right? With a sound. So yeah, you're absolutely right. He's seeing this as the source of human thought, right? And it's important to think of this again, right? This is what concerns a lot of people at the time, right? This question of the mind, right? What is it? Right. We didn't bring it up earlier, but this is also a time of rising science, right, as we understand it today, right? And on the one hand, it's a really exciting time, right, to be alive in that sense, right? You know things about humanity and about the world around you that we never knew before, right? Or at least not in those terms. Okay. And yet, science has a tendency to flatten and categorize things in a way that the Romantics do not like, right? They want to get at the sublime, like I mentioned earlier, right? That the science just cannot get behind, right? But maybe there's some arguments to be made about like more contemporary science, especially if you look at like quantum physics, it kind of tries to do that. But I'm not a physicist, so I'm not going to get into that right now.
Although at the time there were also a lot of alchemy being brought up, and that's magic, really.
Yeah.
Not very much.
It was on like the lower, like it was dying out by the time Mont Blanc was being written, but yeah, you're right. Yeah. It wasn't that far off.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's never really gone, but
technically we are able to do alchemy now.
Yeah.
Right. It's just
better than.
It's just completely energy inefficient, right? It's like it takes so much power to produce like a small amount of gold that is basically worthless. Yeah, good.
It reminds me also of like my linguistics courses where like you see the way certain sounds are pronounced and stuff with the W.
Yeah, good.
So the W is like literally called a glide, like sound, in the IPA the phonetic alphabet.
Yeah.
So like gliding is just this like smooth and like graceful movement. So when you hear it, it does do that, give that effect to the.
Very good.
Yeah.
Now I don't know to what extent those terms wouldn't have. I don't know to what extent they would have been used at the time.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting.
I mean, like naturally, that's how we feel it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can definitely see that in a lot of Shelley's poetry specifically, but also you see this in a lot of Coleridge and Wordsworth, that use of the natural rhythms of language in order to
it's like even if it might have been like defined later, the theory behind it, it's still like is a sound that flows, and that's
good.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, it's better said aloud, because when I was reading it in my mind, it was not as powerful the way it felt. At least it just I was reading it, I was like, oh yay. But this felt better. It felt smoother.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's really good. Who would like to read stanza 2?
I can give it a try.
Go for it.
Please pardon my pronunciation of some words.
It's relatively modern English. Yeah. It's relatively contemporary English, so it should be pretty similar to what we do now.
Thus thou, raven of Arve, dark deep raven, thou many-coloured, many-voiced vale, over whose pines and crags and caverns sail, fast cloud shadows and sunbeams, awful scene, where power and likeness of the Arve comes down, from the ice gulfs that gird his secret throne, bursting through these dark mountains like the flame of lightning through the tempest, thou dost lie. Thy giant brood of pines around thee clinging, children of elder time, in whose devotion the chainless winds still come and ever came, to drink their otters and their mighty swinging, to hear an old solemn harmony, thine earthly rainbows stretched across the sweep of the ethereal waterfall, whose veil robes some unsculptured image, the strange sleep, which when the voices of desert fail, wraps all in its own deep eternity. Thy caverns echoing to the Arp's commotion, a loud, lone sound no other sound can tame. Thou art pervaded with that ceaseless motion. Thou art the path of that unresting sound, dizzy ravin. And when I gaze on thee, I seem as entranced, sublime and strange, to muse on my own separate fantasy, my human mind, which passively now renders and receives fast influencings, holding an unremitting interchange with the clear universe of things around, one legion of wild thoughts, whose wandering wings now float above thy darkness, and now rest, where thou art no unbidden guest. In the still cave of the witch poesy, seeking among the shadows that pass by, ghosts of all things that are, some shade of thee, some phantom, some faint image, till the breast from which they fled recalls them. Thou art there.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Just quick note on pronunciation.
Yeah.
It's pronounced ravine.
Ravine? Okay, ravine.
But no, excellent stuff. We can't go line by line for sake of time here, but
It's a very long one.
yeah, okay, for sure. I'll ask a question here. So compared to the first stanza, what can we say about the imagery of the second stanza? Right? Compare the imagery from the first and second stanza in terms of its qualities, right, and what Shelley's doing with it. There's something really interesting going on here.
He passes from one thing to another.
Good. Yes.
Quite fast, at least,
Yes.
compared to the first one, where
Yes.
he just talks about that one thing.
Mm-hmm. Good. So, in the first one, he's very focused,
Mm-hmm.
right? The river flowing through the mind.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Second stanza, it is longer, and he goes all over the place, right? It's a lot more abstract, right? He's in part because of that lack of focus that we're talking about here. Why would that be? What effect does this have on our understanding of how he's engaging with the mountain, right? If it's becoming more and more abstract.
He's overwhelmed.
Good. Yeah. Yes. Again, sometimes the simplest answer is the best. Yeah. He's overwhelmed by it, right? He used the term wave in the first stanza, right? Think of, have any of you ever been to the beach, right?
Yeah.
In like Hawaii or wherever, right? Right. Try to imagine like, right, massive waves kind of like hitting you. But imagine that 10 times bigger, 100 times bigger, 1,000 times bigger in your mind, right? At some point, it's going to have to get abstract and unruly. Yeah. And you see this really, really well in, where is it? I had written it down. In Children of Elder Time, right? Thy giant brood of pines around thee clinging, children of elder time. Who are these children of elder time?
Ancestors?
Could be ancestors. Ancestors of what? Humans?
Everything.
The mountain? The pines that were mentioned earlier in the line, right? The giant brood of pines that are around. It's a bit unclear.
Yeah.
Right? And this is just one example, right? But it gets at this more abstractness that he's going for. It's kind of all blending in together into this everlasting universe of things. Right? It's almost like he planned out the poem in a way that like makes it so that it's all connected in a really interesting way. Who'd have thunk?
Maybe like a river, because sometimes the currents are like calm and then suddenly they just go faster.
Good. Yeah. And you'll notice this you'll notice this in the rhyme scheme as well, right? It falters every once in a while, right? It's not perfect rhyme. And Shelley was never someone who did a lot of perfect rhyme, right? He did it when it was useful, right, to him, but it kind of starts to collapse in on itself, right? Every once in a while, he'll rhyme something, right? Veil, sail, scene, ravine, down, and then doesn't really rhyme again, right? For a bit, right? And this is not an accident, right? Things are starting to kind of get out of hand, right? And the rhyme scheme reflects this, right? Where power and likeness of the Arv comes down from the ice gulfs that gird this secret throne, his secret throne, bursting through these dark mountains like the flame of lightning through the tempest. Thou dost lie, thy giant brood of pines around thee clinging. It works in terms of rhythm, but it doesn't have the connectedness that a rhyming set of lines would, right? Good. I like this. And every once in a while, of course, he does try to regain some control, right? It would seem. At least that's what I wrote. I don't know if you can maybe disagree with me on this, but right, this is towards the last third of the stanza where he says, to muse on my own separate fantasy, my own human mind, which passively now renders and receives fast influencings, holding an unremitting interchange with the clear universe of things around. Right? So suddenly he comes back to my own human mind, and he's trying to grasp back onto it. Right? Does it quite work? No. Right, because the rest of the stanza afterwards, he just kind of collapses and the wave kind of comes back again, right? But every so often, right, the poet or the speaker is going to try to make an attempt, right, to impose the mind back on again, right? Try to understand in words. Good. Who wants to go with stanza 3?
Can go.
Sure.
When you
find it, yeah.
Some say that gleams of a remoter world visit the soul in sleep, that death is slumber, and that it shapes the busy thoughts outnumber of those who wake and live. I look on high, has some unknown omnipotence unfurled the veil of life and death, or do I lie in dream, and does the mightier world of sleep spread far around and inaccessibly in its circles? For the very spirit fails, driven like a homeless cloud from steep to steep, that vanishes among the viewless gales. Far, far above, piercing the infinite sky, Mont Blanc appears, still, snowy and serene. Its subject mountains, their unearthly forms, pile around it ice and rock, broad veils between of frozen floods, unfathomable deeps, blue as the overhanging heaven that spread, and then among the accumulated steeps, a desert peopled by the storms alone, save when the eagle brings some hunter's bone, and the wolf tracks her there. How hideously its shapes are heaped around, rude, bare, and high, ghastly and scarred and riven. Is this the scene where the old earthquake daemon thought her young ruin? Were these their thorns, or did a sea of fire envelop once this silence known? None can reply. All seems eternal now. The wilderness has mysterious tongue, which teaches awful doubt, or faith so mild, so solemn, so serene. Then men may be, but for such faith with nature reconciled, thou hast a voice, great mountain, to repeal large codes of fraud and woe, not understood by all, but which the wise and great and good interpret or make felt or deeply feel.
This is exactly the middle of the poem, right? Stanza 3 out of 5.
Yeah.
And it's probably the hardest of the stanzas, right? For a very philosophical reason. He suddenly goes into sleep and death. Why? Why might that be?
Well, when you see something bigger than you, you suddenly realize how little you are.
Good.
So that makes you see how vulnerable you can be and how quickly you could just die.
Yeah.
Good.
You know, you realize your own vulnerability, and then you're like, "Holy, I'm not quite as powerful I thought I could be."
Yes. Good. I think I really like that. Yeah. Anything else that we want to add on to this?
I think it's comparison between, how to say, the everlasting life of the mountain or universe, and just as Jack said, the human's life it's very short. I think it's just a contrast, comparison to show how human beings are vulnerable.
Vulnerable. Yeah. This is a theme that Shelley would come back to repeatedly, right, in his poems. By the way, I've been saying Shelley, and I'm obviously referring to Percy Shelley, just so you know, right, in literary parlance, right, because there are two technical Shelleys, right? Usually when we refer to just Shelley, it's Percy, and Mary was Mary Shelley, right? And they refer to themselves as that in their own lives, right? By the way, so just to avoid any confusion that you might have outside of this class, if ever you speak of both, it's Mary Shelley and Shelley. Yeah, this is a topic that Shelley would come back to repeatedly, right? I'm thinking of his longer poem Queen Mab, and he would think of death, or some kind of embodiment of death, as a sibling to sleep, right? And this is something that obviously Neil Gaiman would pick up in the Sandman comic, right? If you've read that at all, it's just great. But right, this idea that sleep, right, this bringer of dreams, this thing that brings you to other worlds, right, is in some way a similar release to what we might imagine as death, right? Getting to something otherworldly, right, and incomprehensible, and yet that is intrinsically part of, at least in Shelley's perspective, the human experience, right? And by the way, this is where we can maybe start to think of criticisms of the Romantic perspective from a planetary point of view, right? Is this kind of reliance on the human perspective? But we can get to that a little bit later, but I'm just like foreshadowing that potential criticism, right? Sowing the seeds of the Romantic destruction, so to speak. And you can clearly see, I think, through these types of stanzas why poets like Emily Dickinson, for example, would be so interested in Shelley, right? This is something that she would pick up on also. And it is important to note that Shelley was, like a lot of Romantics, a political radical, right? There's a reason why I brought this up earlier. I don't think he used that term to talk about himself specifically, but he would be what we call today like an anarchist, right? And a lot of Romantics were, like Byron, for example, would have been among those ideas. So it is really interesting that he gets at some very religious ideas, right? He, I think, explicitly references God. Is it in this one? No, but he does get at what we kind of broadly understand as these very religious experiences, right? Through infinity, through death, through the mountain, right? And yet does it through these kind of secular ways from his perspective, of course, right? So obviously these are a lot of ideas that we can gather from this third stanza, and we can't get through every single part of it, of course not. But it's a very complex one, and I really want to emphasize this, right? He's bringing together these ideas that seem disparate, right, and seem completely unrelated to each other, right? Death, sleep, a mountain. Why? Right? But as you think about it, right, they're not so different, right? We kind of often understand our life through the perspective of death, right? Oh, I'm going to die one day, so I might as well get as much done in my life as possible, right? Or as you both mentioned, right? What is my life compared to the incredible time that this mountain has been on the face of the earth? Right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's like we conceive life as a very finite thing where there's an end to it that is like death, basically.
Yeah.
Whereas the nature he's looking at just appears as this infinite idea. He talks about the sky, the heaven. That way he said, I think, at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, the infinite sky, right? Yeah. Piercing the infinite sky, Mont Blanc appears.
No, that's it.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Good, yeah. And even later, towards the end, right? The earthquake demon taught her young ruin, right? He's talking about geologic forces, right? And again, not too long before this and not too long after, right? There was a famous volcano eruption in the 18th century that also had a huge earthly impact, even if they wouldn't have necessarily been aware that it was because of the volcano eruption, right? It was definitely there, and of course that later eruption in Indonesia, like I mentioned earlier, right? So there's these awarenesses of these forces, even if we can't qualify them specifically, right? And they are death-bringing in many ways, right? And there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And that's terrifying.
Yeah.
But it's also really beautiful to understand, for at least from Shelley's perspective, right, that the Earth has this power, right? The planet has this power. Yeah. Okay. Ling, do you want to take stanza 4? Okay. If you want. I'm not going to force you to do anything that you do not want to in this class.
But just the pronunciation, maybe some words.
No pressure.
Yeah. It's hard.
It is a hard, yeah. No, definitely. And then once we finish the poem, we're slowly going to transition to Blake.
Okay. The fells, the lakes, the forests, and the streams, ocean, and all living things that dwell within the daedalus, lightning and rain, earthquake and fury flood and hurricane. The torpor of the year when feeble dreams visit the hidden buds or dreamless sleep, holds every future leaf and flower the bond, with which from that detested trance they leap. The works and ways of men, their death and births, and that of king, and all that his may be. All things that move and breathe with toil and song, are born and die, revolve, subside, and swell. Power dwells apart in this tranquility, remote, serene, and inaccessible, and leaves the naked countenance of earth, on which I gaze. Even these primeval mountains teach the adverse in mind. The glaciers creep like snakes that watch their prey from their far fountains. Slow rolling on, there many a precipice. Frost and the sun, in scorn of mortal power, have peeled down pyramid and pinnacle, a city of death, distinct with many a tower, and war impregnable of pinning eyes, yet not a city, but a flood of ruin. Is there that from the boundaries of the sky, roses perpetual stream. West pines are streaming, is destined to pass, or in the mangled soil, branchless and shattered sand, the rocks drawn down. From your remote waste have overthrown the limits of the dead and living worlds, never to be reclaimed. The dwelling place of insects, beasts, and birds become its spoil. Their food and their retreat for ever gone. So much of life and joy is lost. The race of man fails, far indreared. His work and dwelling vanish,
Mm-hmm.
like smoke before the tempest stream, and their place is not known. Below, west caves shine in the rushing torrent's restless flame, which from those sacred chasms, in tumult well,
Mhm.
within the well, and one majestic river. The breeze and blood of distant lands forever rose is loud, waters to the ocean waves. Breezes is swift, vapors to the secret air. Wow.
Thank you.
Always
Thank
have
you.
you for me.
Were you going to say something, Ian?
No.
Okay. We talked about the third stanza and how it kind of suddenly shifts towards the abstract death, right?
Mhm.
And notice that in this one he comes back, right? We're coming back to the mountain. It is still unruly, but we're coming back to the materiality of the mountain,
Mhm.
right? In relation to the death that he mentioned in stanza 3, right? In fact, about halfway through this stanza, we're seeing a kind of paraphrase of what stanza 3 was, right? Power dwells apart in its tranquility, remote and serene and inaccessible. I say halfway through. It's like a little bit before halfway through, but yeah. So if you want a paraphrase of stanza 3, that's pretty much what he said in like 12 lines, or 25 lines. And yet he comes back to the very real death, right? Material death, that such a mountain can cause after having talked about it in the most philosophical way, right? And that's an interesting move, right? That he's constantly playing with. So yes, between mind and nature, between abstract and concrete, between life, death, right? These are the interplays that are happening throughout the poem, right? And it's complicated. Yes, you're all absolutely correct in saying this, right? It's complicated for a reason, right? Because, again, these are the first people that are starting to actively put these into words, right, as we would understand it in the modern day, because everything around them is incomprehensible, right? The dynamics at play, right, that they're seeing unfold, both nature-wise, politically, socially, etc., are incomprehensible, right? And so this is something that he's trying to get at, right? With things like breechless and shattered stand, the rocks drawn down from young remotest waste have overthrown the limits of the dead and living world, never to be reclaimed, right? How do you overthrow the limits of death, right? To Shelley, you become more than human, right? Or you're non-human. That's the only way that you actually do that, right? Is by being a rock, or a mountain, in this case. Anything else that we want to add about this? And then I'll read the last stanza. I think the last stanza is probably... It's beautiful, and yet it's probably one of the most... No, I was going to say problematic. That's not the right term. No. So we're not going. I'm going to withhold my comment until the end. Yet Mont Blanc yet gleams on high. The power is there, the still and solemn power of many sights and many sounds, and much of life and death in the calm darkness of the moonless nights. In the lone glare of day, the snow descends upon the mountain. None beholds them there, nor when the flakes burn in the sinking sun, or the starbeams dart through them. Winds contend silently there, and heap the snow with breath, rapid and strong, but silently. Its home the voiceless lightning in these solitudes keep innocently, and like vapor broods over the snow. The secret strength of things which govern thought, notice the use of things again, which governs thought, and to the infinite dome of heaven is as a law, inhabits thee. And what were thou, and earth, and stars, and sea, if to the human mind's imaginings silence and solitude were vacancy? So he calms down, right? We get this intense poem, right? Oh my God! Fire and fields and lakes and rock and geologic time, everything is an earthquake, and oh my God, death. But look at that pretty snow falling down. That the sun hits just right? We live in Canada, right? So we know what this. Yeah, you know what? I don't know, if in your area of China, you've seen snow in that way, but right when the sun hits snow just right? There's this really beautiful and hot and cold sheen happening at the same time, right? That's what he's talking about, right? So he kind of calms down, right? After having spent 3 stanzas basically having an existential crisis brought on by a mountain, right? But he ends with a really interesting question. And what were thou and earth and stars, thou being the mountain here, or everything, maybe it's the infinite universe of things, and sea, if to the human mind's imaginings silence and solitude or vacancy? What does that mean? Paraphrase this question for me.
I would, but something happened to my computer.
Okay. Oh no. It's an incredible turn at the end of the poem. Right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, vacancy.
Good. Silence and solitude were vacancy. What does vacancy mean?
Like free space.
Free space, yeah. Good. Emptiness.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what does the question mean?
To the human mind's imagining, so what he's perceiving, or of the mountain of nature around him.
Yeah. So the thou here, right, Mont Blanc, and its surroundings, right?
And earth and stars and sea.
You would still be there, right? Obviously. Everything is still going to be there. But he asks a great question. What is that without me looking at you? Is it anything? Right? It's a really bizarre turn towards the end, right? Because he's as we just went over, right? He's coming to terms, right? His mind is trying to grasp everything that he's seeing, and he can't. He's constantly failing to fully understand everything at once, right? He can't get at the infinite universe of things.
And he
realizes how small and important he might be next to this power of nature through it all. But then at the end, it's he switches and goes back to a very anthropocentric vision of the world.
Yeah.
So he got so close to something to then go back to.
Would that consideration, right, that he just went through be even possible if he weren't there? Right, to ask the questions. at the time, he's probably thinking, it's a bit unfair to like assume what Shelley was thinking, right? Like I don't want to do that. And I actually, there are notes on the poems of 1816 by Shelley, by Mary Shelley, actually. And I don't think she mentions anything about Mont Blanc specifically. Oh, yes, she does. It was composed under the immediate impression of the deep and powerful feelings excited by the objects which it attempts to describe. Attempts here is a really key term. And as an undisciplined overflowing of the soul, undisciplined, rests its claim to approbation on an attempt to imitate the untamable wildness and inaccessible solemnity from which those feelings sprang. Right? Untamable wildness, right? I erased it, but like it's really on an attempt to imitate the untamable wildness and inaccessible solemnity from which those feelings sprang. Right? Yeah, it's fine. Right? And I think it's deliberately made in a way that you wouldn't have a strict answer to this question, right? What would you be if I weren't there to see you?
Yeah. Right? Well, Mont Blanc was there before him, and it still is there.
Exactly. Yeah, good. And right, this is where again we can like start pushing back against the romantic mode, right? Is that a lot of people rightfully criticize them as being anthropocentric, right? To use the term that you used, right? And they're getting somewhere, right? There is very much the beginnings of something really interesting, right? As we're increasingly digging into the soil, right? Industrial mining, as we understand it today, really kicks off in this era, right? Obviously, some form of mining has always happened since humans have existed, right? But like as we know it today, it really kicks off in this time, right? So there's a full understanding of what the intricacies of the inside of the earth are, right? We're really coming to terms with that. And it's simultaneously terrifying and beautiful and awful. And yet, it is technically true. None of it would be there, right? We wouldn't do that if it weren't humans, right? Chimpanzees don't necessarily dig into the soil, right? Like we do, right? So there is something true to that, right? But of course, Shelley's not thinking of it in the purely like materialistic sense of like, oh, what are we, right? But he's thinking of it in the sense of like, just what does it mean to imagine that, right? And that's probably the best way that we can use the romantics in the planetary sense, right? Yes, they are anthropocentric, right? Yes, a lot of them are. I think maybe the one that's the least anthropocentric is probably someone like Charlotte Smith, who has a great poem called Beachy Head, which I want to say like around the same time that Shelley's writing Mont Blanc, is getting at like not only the rocks and deep time around her, right, but also the organisms that have existed for millions of years. So she even takes it kind of like one step further. The only reason I didn't give Beachy Head in this class is because it's even longer than Mont Blanc, so I just didn't want to like overwhelm us even more. Yeah. Never say that I'm not generous for this class. Right. So these are questions that are legitimately being asked, right? And one of the advantages of planetary criticism is that it tries to get us past, right, the purely human view that like this only exists, or we can only think of this because our mind is what it is, right? We take the view that Shelley has at the end, which is to say the mind can only go so far.
Yeah.
Right? It's an incredible machine, right? The mind is phenomenal. It can't quite get to what we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
Right?
Like the mind is incredible, but the world is this like even bigger.
Good. Yeah. And again, this I mentioned Kant earlier. This is one of Kant's great discoveries, right? Is the ocean of the mind. when I use the term ocean, I pulled this from a thinker I like very much called Timothy Morton. He used that term, the ocean of the mind, right? And a really good example is how if I asked you to think of infinity, right? Like you can technically do that, right? Right? If I say, imagine infinity, there's something that pops in your mind.
Huh. Oh, yeah.
But can you count to infinity?
I'm going to try.
You can try, but you'll never, by definition, you can never get there, right? Yeah. Like, I can give you all the time in the world and you'll never get there. Right? So there's this double-edged sword, right, to human perception and human experience, right? The ocean of the mind seems infinite, right? Like an ocean. If you stand in front, like the image that I showed you earlier, right? The guy sitting in front of, right? Sitting in front of the Atlantic Ocean, right, on the coast. I don't know, go to Nova Scotia or whatever and just stare out into the ocean, right? It looks infinite, seems infinite. You should kind of embrace it and let it wash over you, right? But it's not, right? There's like an inherent like limit to how you can understand it.
Yeah.
Right? I've gone a little bit over time. How about we take like a short break just so I can get some water here? Yeah, and you can try to like fix your computer, and then we'll slowly transition into Blake, where we'll spend the rest of the class. Okay. Blake, a very different poet, as I'm sure you've noticed from Shelley.
Yeah.
Just as radical, but in a very different way.
And also very, very shorter way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Which we can talk about why it's shorter. Success.
I'm just gonna blame the plug right there.
Yeah, do that.
It
works better for my stress.
Oh, for real though. Sometimes technology can be so fickle. As you know, I also teach at college.
Yeah.
And I used to, before I had my own work computer over there, I used my personal laptop, similar to the one I have here. I plugged it in one day and it just died.
Yeah, it's exactly what happened.
Like I plugged in the HDMI cable, ready to give a class, and I was like, nope.
I was like, this
not today.
Cannot be happening. I needed to work and do other things. So it was like,
and we're kind of reliant too on it. Like,
oh my God,
for teaching too. Last year I was teaching in high school.
Yeah.
And every once in a while it just would not work.
Yep.
And I was like, guys, I don't know what we're gonna do, but what I had planned is not.
Yeah, and it's just like every homework is on there. Most of the projects, exams.
Yeah.
I need my computer. And I'm just like, okay.
So Blake is kind of a personal favorite of mine.
Okay.
I think there's always something to unpack in Blake, right? And he's someone who, in his own time, he was much more aware of the other romantics than they were aware of him, right? He was not well known as a poet at his time, even though obviously he wrote a lot of it, right? Although this also includes his prose, but he wrote a lot of it, and he wrote some very engaged poetry, right? And he, like Shelley, would remain committed to his ideals, where other romantics would kind of leave them by the wayside, right? I gave the example of Wordsworth, who would slowly veer more and more towards conservatism, right? And Coleridge. Well, Coleridge is a bit of a special case because he was a drug addict, so it was very difficult for him to actually maintain any kind of ideals when you're high on opium. Yeah. But as a general rule, he was much more known at the time as a printer, right, and even a artist, right. And that's actually how people rediscovered Blake, was through his paintings. Right? Which I will show you in a second, because he drew paintings of his poems, right? So he printed his own poems, including songs of innocence and experience, because he had the capacity to do so, and he would actually interpret them visually, right? And I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about his work, right? Is very visual. Right? Even if it's obviously text, he's a very visual thinker, and a very visual writer. Okay? Unlike Shelley, Blake was devoutly religious, right? And there was, and where today we understand, because we live in the 21st century and it's a cursed century, we understand religious people as like in the evangelical American right-wing type of way, right? Which is very disappointing. But at the time when Blake was writing, that was not necessarily the case, right? Religion for Blake was an avenue through which he could have very radical politics, right? Mostly because of what he saw as the core of Christianity, right? Helping the poor, right? Finding, for him, the grace of God on earth, right? And so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
And using, the teachings, again, for Blake here, the teachings of Jesus in order to criticize, power, right? I'm saying this assuming that you know at least something about Christianity. So this is not going to be a course on Christianity. Don't worry about it. But it is, I think, important to know at least that background for Blake, right? And Blake actually, to a point, thought that he had visions. Right. If I remember correctly, and someone, maybe if you looked into him, you may want to fact check me on this. When he was a child, he genuinely thought that he had seen a vision of an angel in the trees, which is interesting from a romantic perspective, right? I don't know if it was, if today we would consider it a hallucination. He considered it a vision. Right.
He thought he was a prophet or prophecy kind of.
Yeah, he did write poems that he called prophecies, but I don't think he went so far as to call himself like a prophet on the level of like Jesus, right, or Muhammad or whatever.
When you go to a biography, it says he was a prophet and a poet, a writer, but like
So that's the thing, right? Because like I said, some of his poems take the term prophecy. Right. And what he meant by that is he was trying to foresee where these things would go. Right. I don't actually know, so I'm not going to state any claims on it. I don't actually know if he considered them like full on visions, like as we would understand prophecy today. Yeah. Right. So I'm always a bit nebulous and tenuous as to like actually calling him a prophet, right? In the sense that we see it now. Right? As I pick up some stuff here that I wanted to show you, what are some of our first impressions of Blake? Right, from Songs of Experience, right? I had you read basically the first two poems from that section, right? And Songs of Experience is, of course, part of his collection, Songs of Innocence and Experience, right? So he initially published Songs of Innocence in 1789, like I mentioned earlier. Songs of Experience was never published as a solo thing, right? It was always Songs of Innocence, and then a few years later, he published Songs of Innocence and Experience in one volume. Right. This was in 1794. And the only reason I bring this up is because of the subtitle of the collection, which is Songs of Innocence and Experience, showing the two contrary states of the human soul. Right. And that's really what he's interested in. Right. Obviously, innocence, not in the sense of naive. Right. That's not what he's going for when we say innocent. Right? He was much more interested in the idea of getting at the freedom and maximum amount of maximum amount of freedom that you have when you're not jaded by the world around you, right? And that's why he uses the imagery of children a lot in those innocence poems, right? Because they're not crushed by the soulless, what he saw as like the soulless world that was developing in the 18th century, right?
That's still true.
Yeah, Blake was way ahead of his time. Like a depressed Gen Z, like
It's right in the sense that children are way happier than the rest of the world.
So he uses this, of course, this imagery, but he also sees like a great deal of power, right, in the innocence, right, ideal. Whereas the Songs of Experience are much more complex, right, in that sense. And it's more of a cynical narrator, in the Songs of Experience than you see in Songs of Innocence. And of course, we don't have time to like cover true comparisons between the two. The classic example that people really go with Blake is the lamb, which is in Songs of Innocence, and the tiger, right? Songs of Experience. I'm sure you've heard the tiger, at least on some level, right? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night. What fearful eye? What terrible eye would frame my fearful symmetry? Something like that. Yeah. So it keeps going, right? And of course, the lamb. Right, classic image of Christianity and innocence, right? Usually Jesus is compared to a lamb of God, so to speak. And the speaker of the tiger, contrarily to the lamb, right, is someone who's like, how can something so horrible exist, right? How can a God that made the lamb also make this awful tiger beast thing that kills people, right? And the whole point is not that the tiger exists, right? Blake is not dunking on tigers as a thing, right? What he's doing is inhabiting a narrator who's cynical and who only sees the bad, right? That's what he's kind of going for with Songs of Experience. Anyway, so that's just a little bit of context here that I think is interesting. What did we think of these two poems that we read in Songs of Experience? Just like initial thoughts. Did we find them interesting? Did we like them compared to Mont Blanc? Did we like them less than Mont Blanc? Equal? Just like initial thoughts. I'm curious because Blake can be a bit hit or miss, I feel, depending on who you give them to in what context.
I mean, he was definitely religious. Like you said, the first thing I saw was how much religious symbols and words were in the first poem, Songs of Experience.
Yeah.
And the second one, I was just like, wow, this is super dark.
Yeah.
It felt way much, I don't know, like less hopeful.
Yeah.
So compared to the other two, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I did not quite know what to think. I just knew that the first one seemed, you're very religious, very about the new beginnings. I don't know, some type of new. There's a lot of words like dawn and dewy grass. It felt like maybe a rebirth of some kind.
I like that idea of rebirth. It's really good. Yeah, I hadn't written it down in my notes, but I like it.
And the second one was just very much darker because of like selfish father, cruel, jealous, much more negative connotation compared to the other one.
Good.
So I guess there was a reason that you chose those two because to me they were complete opposites.
Good. We'll come back to that. Do you two have anything that you wanted to add as like initial thoughts on these poems?
Yeah, I read all of the readings for today in like one sitting.
Oh wow!
And it was just such like a big shift between the lengthy poem Mont Blanc and then this.
Yeah.
So I feel like shifting from one to the like going from one to the other. It just left me like a bit like it's the conciseness and like the shortness of it was like I don't know how to express it, but it was just
Keep that in mind, the conciseness. I think that's a really important, like, formalistic aspect that we can compare with Shelley. I say that knowing full well that we have like 35 minutes left of class, so I don't know to like what extent we'll actually get through all of this. But yeah. And Ling, did you have anything that you wanted to add, or?
No, because I have not read out it yet.
Good, no problem. Totally understand. Just to kind of get at the darkness that Alicia, you were kind of bringing up, there's a choir, almost 9 years ago, the University of Utah choir, that actually recorded a version of these two songs, right? Okay. I'm not going to play the whole 6-minute thing just for consciousness of time here, but I do think vibe-wise, they get it. They understand what the Songs of Experience are going for. Okay? And just note, is my volume up? Yeah, I think so.
It's loading.
Classic internet.
That's okay.
It started yet. No, it's yeah.
Good. Anyway, I just wanted to give you a minute, but there's a disconnect, right, in some of the language that you see in Blake's poem, right, or Blake's work in general, and the kind of meaning behind it in a lot of ways, and that's why I said that I think they get it, right. It is, I'm sure you've noticed, a very somber type of song, right? And yet, as was mentioned, right, we do get at least some sense of rebirth, right? With the use of terms like light, renew, or dewy grass, right? Arise from out of the dewy grass, I should say. And yeah, I guess we can just go through this poem. They're very short poems, so we can kind of read them, and I will show you at the same time. This is when it was first published. Right? This is what Blake drew for the introduction. Right? So as I read it, you can maybe look at it and see why he may have done it like this. Right? Hear the voice of the bard, who present, past, and future sees, whose ears have heard the holy word that walked among the ancient trees, calling the lapsed soul and weeping in the evening dew that might control the starry pole, and fallen light renew. O earth, return. Arise from the dewy grass. Night is worn, and the morn rises from the slumberous mass. Turn away no more. Why wilt thou turn away? The starry floor, the watery shore, is given thee till the break of day. I think one of the best ways to read Blake is first to ask who the speaker is, right? Because you have poems from him like The Chimney Sweeper, which is repeated both in innocence and experience from two very different perspectives, right? But it's the same speaker, right? Just having two different experiences of being a chimney sweeper, right? Or you have the famous poem that he wrote called A Poison Tree, which is about a psychopath, basically, who wishes his friend dead, right? So trying to understand the actual narrator goes a long way to seeing what the poem is about. Right? So who might we say is the speaker of this poem? Right? Based off what we've learned, can we say anything about any kind of clear speaker? Right? And by the way, I don't have a fixed answer for this. I have my own interpretation, but I'm open to other people's interpretation from this particular viewpoint. So who might the speaker of the introduction be? I'm going to opening up Earth's answer as an image.
The bard.
Okay, the bard. What makes you say that?
It begins with "Hear the voice of the bard,"
right?
And then it could be him, the bard.
Could be the bard, right?
Then speaking, but that's only one way of saying.
Oh, okay. So it starts off with like "Hear the voice of the bard," and then the bard kicks in.
Past, future sees. It could be like an introduction. Oh, here's he, and then he starts.
Okay.
Could be a way of seeing it.
Interesting. I like that. It is because you were mentioning Prophet Blake, the prophet for Blake, and this is something that you get in his work called "All Religions Are One," which is, I guess, a hot take right there. But yeah, exactly. But it's a really good piece, by the way. If you really wanted to get into Blake as a thinker, it's an interesting piece. To him, poets and prophets are the same. Right. So when he uses a word like bard, who present, past, and future sees, he's talking about both in the sense of like actually seeing things, right? But also bard in the sense of a poet, right? So he's kind of combining these two together. Right? Interesting. Do we have any other perspectives than the bard? I think it's a really good one.
I mean, it could be the one.
God?
Yeah. God could be another way, because it does feel a little bit like biblical.
Okay. Yeah, it does feel biblical. That's really good. Yeah. Yeah, I read this poem as not having a specifically tangible speaker, right? I didn't necessarily think of it along the sense of God explicitly, but I like the idea of like, that's one way of putting it, as much as any, right? But a kind of intangible speaker that's calling on the return of a poet prophet, right? Because it's never mentioned, right? If it's a man or woman, right? We don't know. We have nothing about the actual narrator as far as description goes.
Yeah, there's no pronouns.
Yeah, were you going to say something, or?
I was just clearing my throat.
Okay,
but
sorry.
There's like the idea of like, because that's like quite some time after Shakespeare.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Good.
So it's like, is it someone who?
Oh, because you're thinking the bard, right? Shakespeare the bard.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm
Yeah.
making that. I don't know.
I actually don't know if the term was used for Shakespeare at that point yet. That's really good. Usually we ascribe the bard to Shakespeare because he's like the standard, the gold standard, right, of poets. But I don't know if Blake here is using it specifically in relation to. I have no idea, right? There are other poems that he writes that do make explicit references to Shakespeare. He was a great admirer of him, but I don't know if this one in particular is. That's a good pull, though. I like that.
Thanks.
Awesome. The main reason why I brought this introduction up, of course, is for the middle passage, right? What happens right around, or right exactly, I should say, in the middle of this poem? What's the line that hits exactly in the middle? And it's a shift. I guess you could say a turn in the poem.
Do you mean like "O Earth, Earth, return"?
Yeah, good. Right? We go from "O fallen, fallen light," right? Falling, right? Literally. And by the way, this is not a class on like poetic analysis, technically speaking, on like how to read poetry. But as far as the rhythm and stresses is concerned, right? Fallen light, right? It's literally falling as you say it, right? O earth, return, right? The stresses kind of go up, right? Arise from the dewy grass, right? So the first half of the poem is kind of a drop down, right? Hear the voice of the bard, who present, past, and future sees, right? It keeps kind of stressing downwards, right? In its rhythm. And then up for the rest, right? O earth, return, arise from the dewy grass. Night is worn, and the morn rises from the slumberous mass, right? This is a speaker, right, who wants, I think you're absolutely right, Alicia, some kind of rebirth, right? but doesn't know where to find it. Right? God's failed him, right, so to speak. Right? The lapsed soul weeping in the evening dew. Right? The cynical narrator that is so prevalent in the songs of experience, and is trying to look for something else. Okay, now let's go to the second poem. This is the drawing that he made with this one. Hold on.
I really like the idea of having like a visual to it too.
Yeah. This is what he drew with Earth's answer. Earth raised up her head. From the darkness dread and drear, her light fled, stony dread, and her locks covered with grey despair, prisoned on watery shore. Starry jealousy does keep my den, cold and horror. Weeping o'er, I hear the father of the ancient men, selfish father of men, cruel, jealous, selfish fear can delight, chained in night. The virgins of youth and morning bear. Does spring hide its joy when buds and blossom grow? Does the sower sow by night, or the plowman in darkness plow? Break this heavy chain that does freeze my bones around selfish, vain, eternal bane, that free love with bondage bound. Who's the speaker of this poem? This one is, I would say, a little bit more clear-cut.
Yeah, they are pronouns here. It says hi. I hear.
Yeah. It's literally called
So
Earth's Answer. Right?
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I don't know if in my edition that's it, but I don't know if in yours it's the same thing. Mine is like capitalized Earth, all caps Earth, and then lowercase answer. I don't know if it's the same thing in yours.
It's capital letter, so it is the Earth, and not just Earth.
Right. Okay. Good. Yeah.
I downloaded a PDF, which is it's like
it's just
full on capitals.
Yeah, I don't know what the standard is for this particular edition because some poems are
here,
just all
like on the one he drew. It's like
yes. Okay, so yeah, I guess they're following as he drew them. Okay, good. So yeah, so in this case, it's explicitly Earth, right? Mm-hmm. Except at the beginning, right? We get this omniscient narrator. Earth raised her head from the darkness, dread and drear. Her light fled, and then for the rest of the poem, it's the Earth talking, right? Good. So the reason why I brought up the images, I'll just put them side by side here, see if I can actually do that properly with my incredible technological skills. Good. Yes, nice. So these are obviously poems that respond to one another, right? O Earth, return. And then in the second poem, Earth's answer, right? So Earth is responding to the call of the omniscient narrator of the first one in order to actually return. We can get back to that return in a second, but what sense do we get from the way Blake depicted these poems, right? How do these poems connect to each other just based off of the visuality that Blake associated with them, right? I think there's some really interesting parallels in the poem and the visuals. I'm curious what you make of it.
Well, if the first poem is a human being talking to Earth, like it's a person in the first drawing.
I don't know. Am I pointing to the right one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay. Good.
yes, you are. Then it's like we're asking something, and the Earth then answers the person. As we see, it's the Earth.
Yeah.
In the drawing, and it's like you caused this. It feels like this anyway. It's like we would like a rebirth because we need to find something. I don't know, to believe in or anything.
Yeah.
And then the second one is just like, yeah, but you did this with your jealousy, your selfishness, and your darkness. So it feels like, oh, we're asking of something, and the Earth is just like, oh, well.
No,
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, good. Anything else that we make with these?
I like how the first one seems to be just like like within a cloud that comes from the mind of the like little person that's drawn at the bottom.
Yeah.
While the other one is just like covered in roots and leaves and stuff that seem to come from the earth.
It's almost a comic book. Yeah. So, they had comics at the time in some form, but I really like that as well. And the Earth almost takes up the same position as the human, right? It just kind of replaced that. I guess you were getting at that a little bit, Alicia, right? But I really like that.
It like envelops the text.
Yeah.
The text in both.
Yeah. Good. So one of them is like a purely human product, right? The introduction, right? A human imagination, the lapsed soul, the bard, right? Who sees past, present, future. There's a lot of potential there. And yet in Earth's answer, right? The Earth is the poetry, right? I think that's kind of what he's getting at with the way that you're absolutely right, Danny. It's enveloping the text, right? In his depiction here. It is one with the text, so to speak. Blake is almost reading the Earth here, right? This is a bit more of a modern way that we would put it, of reading the Earth or reading the planet. But that's kind of what he seems to be getting at in this depiction, at the very least. If ever you do read more Blake work, just in general, all of his images have been digitized on the Blake archive. They're well worth looking into, and you can make an easy paper out of them. By the way, if you can,
actually, it helps.
Yeah, and of course, there's something to be said about how much we attribute authorial intent, right? Like what an author meant the work to be versus what we interpret it to be, right? You can have a whole discussion about that, but I do think it offers like a good way to start, certainly, right? What he wanted to do with it. Sorry, did I?
No, it's just interesting. It's interesting to see like not that many authors like use different media to represent their work. So like that one work is represented through two different media, which is interesting.
Blake's other work is very scary. And I mean this quite complimentarily, right? Like he, let's see if I can find a good
scary,
one.
Like the way he...
His humans don't look human.
Oh, okay.
And it's just like odd proportions that you wouldn't expect from a painter of the time, right? It's very Picasso-esque in some ways. Like this is a good one. Yeah. So this is a depiction. So again, because of his religious background, he drew a lot of biblical imagery, but like just like weirdly proportioned humans.
Yes.
And
interesting.
Yeah.
It feels a little bit like
I like that.
Like the thing with the fingers.
Yeah.
I don't know what's the name of that thing.
Yeah. Anyway, just so you know, he does a lot of like weird stuff. He also drew a lot of philosophers, and so he drew like Isaac Newton at some point. It's wild stuff. Anyway, so I wanted to show you that. Okay, so I wanted to spend the rest of today's class at least going through some of the elements of Earth's answer, because I think it's the more productive one for our talk, for our conversation here, right? Yeah. What do we make of Earth's answer, so to speak, right? In more detail here. So you gave me your initial impressions, and that's really good. They were great. What else do we make of it more literarily? Yeah.
I feel like I've seen in more recent works, like Earth is often represented as a woman, which I find interesting.
And do you think Earth is a woman here? Well, actually, yes. Her life flight. Yes. Sorry. Yeah. What do you make of that? Like, why is that important or interesting that Earth is a woman?
Well, if you think about how people think of women, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, in a sense, maybe it might be going too far a little bit, but we live in a world that's very like capitalistic and the way everything works like we as humans value like have to tend to value like men and how they organize the world, and then to see like Earth being represented as this feminine figure just kind of like goes against that very humanly structured idea of the world.
Good. Yeah, that's really
if that
interesting.
makes any sense.
Yeah, again, I would kind of say that that's a double-edged sword, right, in many ways, because on the one hand, we tend to, you're absolutely right, imagine the Earth as like this just object, right, that we can mine the resources of. We talked about this a little bit last week, and this is a theme that we will come back to again and again, right?
Yeah.
And you're right that personifying the Earth does make it a little bit more easy for us to kind of like, how could I say it? Feel sympathy, right? I guess, right? Because it's something that looks like us, right? But there's two things to say on that. One, why do we need the Earth to look like us in order to be sympathetic to it, right? We literally live on it. We live by it, right? Shouldn't that be enough to garner its, right?
I mean, we value probably more how humans feel because they feel, and we have a tendency to think that nature doesn't feel the way we feel because it doesn't have a subconscious the way we have. So it's just like, even if we do things to her, what is she gonna do? Cry about it? It's very mean thing to say, but
what does Blake think that the Earth does if we do mean things to her?
She's gonna feel.
Feel?
Yeah.
Good.
She's gonna have feelings about it. She's gonna have pain.
So here in Earth's answer, right, we get an Earth that is chained up, right? Break this heavy chain, right? It's an Earth that, at least in the prior to last stanza, is responding to the petrifying conditions of agriculture, right, of intensive agriculture. Does spring hide its joy when buds and blossoms grow? Does the sower sow by night and the plowman in darkness plow? Right, so this is an Earth that is responding to exactly what Blake is seeing happening, right?
Or it's not just about the environment. I think it's more about a question of social question or politics.
Yes.
Because it mentioned very many words about oppression.
Yes.
And like chain, like selfish in a way. I don't know concretely what the father of the Asian man means. Maybe it's not just the ancestors. I think it can be mentioned to the authority or many things like.
It can be from a religious perspective for Blake, yeah. Absolutely.
They can be the things, the power who oppress the class. And the Earth, I think, is not just a representation of nature. I think it can be all the classes, all the human beings who are oppressed by authority.
Good.
I think. Maybe I won't.
Yeah, no, I really like that. Just to add on to what you're saying, because I think it's a really good line to pull from, right? I hear the father of ancient men.
Yes.
What does that mirror from the first poem? It echoes something that was said in the first poem in the introduction. One of the first lines.
The holy word?
Right afterwards.
That walked among the ancient trees.
Good. So we go from ancient trees in the one poem, right, in the introduction.
It's time to learn.
It's all good. Right, so we go from ancient trees in the first one to ancient men in the second one, right? We see a shift, right, happening in what we perceive as ancient, right? In the one, we're trying to get back to the ancient trees, right, and trying to get back to our knowledge of those ancient trees or our engagement with those ancient trees. In the second, the ancient trees have disappeared. That is what we're weeping over, right, in that third line of that second stanza, right? And instead it has been replaced by ancient men. However you want to describe that, right? And I think then you bring up a really good point that it can be a lot of things, right? It can be religion being imposed onto a certain viewpoint. It can be authority. It can be just your chained human, right? All kinds of stuff, right? To come back to Leonie's point of Earth as woman, right? And why it's a double-edged sword, right? And this kind of ties into what, Alicia, you also were saying. There's been a lot of really interesting, research done. The most notable one that people constantly come back to, even though I have some issues with it, but it's a pretty good one in general, is Silvia Federici's Caliban and the Witch, right? Caliban, we should mention, by the way, for our class, right? We talked about him last week. Caliban and the Witch talks a lot about how capitalism specifically relies on the unpaid labor of women's bodies, right? And the exploitation of women's bodies. Right? And so to create a parallel between the earth and woman, I think gets a little bit at what that entails, right? And this image of earth as woman is one that has continued before Blake and continued since. That existed before Blake and has continued since, right? And I think also Blake's using it because it's a standard of the time, right, of referencing Earth as woman. But I think us with modern hindsight can definitely make that connection of woman as unpaid and highly exploited resource, quote unquote, right? Obviously, I don't believe this. In the same way that Earth is, right? Think of the unpaid labor of the home or anything like that, right? Especially true in Blake's time, although slightly less so in North America today, but still to some extent. What was I going to say? Yes, the last thing I wanted to say, when you say, well, does the Earth feel? I think it's a core principle that we're going to kind of develop throughout this class, that the answer to that question is yes.
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah,
good.
It reacts to us.
And that's part of the reason why I brought up this Blake poem, right, is because it's a really good example of how, even if it's not perfect, right, it can be read as problematic and anthropocentric, as we brought up with the Shelley poem. It is a really good example of how there's already this thought being had of how the Earth does feel, right? And we see this in the most basic, like, easy to understand way of climate change, right? Like, what is the rising tides of the Earth is not, if not a response to everything that's happening, right? But even on a more fundamental level, there's a lot of research, and this is some of the benefits of science, I would say here. There is a lot of research about how trees communicate with one another, right, these days, right? What's that if not a form of feeling, right, and consciousness on some level, right? Through, like, their root system, they communicate. That's insane, right? When you think of it. Yeah. And obviously they didn't know that, right? Like, this is way before
they still had a sense of, like,
something is going on.
Yeah, something is going on, right? And this is something that we're going to bring back up. I'm having you read Forage, right, later in October.
Yeah.
And Anna Singh's, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The mushroom at the end of the world, right? Mushrooms are another, like, really great thing to think about, which I learned recently. Apparently we have, like, quite a bit of genetic similarities with mushrooms as humans, right? Which is kind of insane to think about. Yeah.
This is why there's a show about, mushrooms taking over us.
Yeah. The Last of Us.
Yeah.
I hesitated to actually show an episode of The Last of Us in this class. It's so good.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. That first season is an all-timer. Okay. Any last thoughts that we wanted to make about this particular class? I'm happy that we went into a more hopeful direction at the end. I didn't want to end it on a dour note. Because next week, by the way, we're going to get
If you go back to, like, Mont Blanc, with this idea of like they personify the earth to acknowledge that maybe the earth has feelings and stuff. And then in Mont Blanc, it's hard. I would say this is probably my interpretation of it, but I would say it's hard to think that the earth might not feel if it is this like huge and like powerful thing that we can't even comprehend. So who are we like to assume that it wouldn't?
Yeah. And Shelley kind of that use of the term voiceless is really interesting in reference to that Shelley uses in Mont Blanc, right at the very end, voiceless. It's kind of contradictory, right?
Yeah.
Because the entire poem is how he's trying to get to understand the voice of the world, right? And he just can't quite do it, so he just interprets it as voiceless. Right?
Well, I don't know if it's voiceless or more like some humans don't have voices, but they still communicate.
Yeah, right. But that's the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is voice just a human thing?
Yeah.
I would say no.
No.
Right? And even if he uses the term voiceless, I think his poem demonstrates that the mountain is anything but.
Yes.
Right?
No, that's it.
That's really good. Next week, Heart of Darkness.
Yeah.
Have we started reading it?
No, but I'm excited since it seems to be super interesting. You talked about it.
Yeah, it's a problematic fave. I'll say that. It's not...
Most things are.
Yes. Some teachers, I will, I guess, I don't want to call it a trigger warning because that's not what this is going to be. I don't mean it in that sense. Some teachers have decided to stop using this text because usually what students focus on is yes, and rightfully so that you should focus on it, but is the racism and can't get past the racism of the text.
Okay.
Right? Yes, it is something that we will talk about, right? And this is not, that's why I'm saying it's not a trigger warning, so to speak, right? I'm sure you're all intelligent enough to deal with racism in a way that is critical, right? As we should. But there is more to Heart of Darkness than just the racism, right? And there's a reason why I included it in the syllabus of this class, right? Because it starts to get, again, it alludes to a lot of the concepts that we're focusing on here, right? And yeah, I'll just say that. You should absolutely point to the racism and criticize it. Look at other stuff that's happening, especially on a formalistic level. The Spivak text on Planetarity, I put it up, I think, already on Studium. Great. Yes. The reason why I included this with Heart of Darkness, she does mention Heart of Darkness in the text. This one is a little bit of a weird one to read because it's technically a transcript from a presentation that she gave. Right, so the flow of her words is more like how I would speak in the class here, just kind of going from one idea to the next, right? Okay. And she's doing that to develop what she calls planetarity as a concept, right? So it might be a little bit of an unruly text to read. As usual, focus on Heart of Darkness, and whatever you get to in Spivak's planetarity, great. Right. But she only references Heart of Darkness itself for a few pages, but the rest is like developing a theoretical concept.
Just a question. Heart of Darkness, was that at the library?
I don't think I ordered it, but you can find, I'm sure the reason why I didn't order it, you can find it easily online. It's in the public domain, so you'll find plenty of versions of it. I'm sure they have it at the library here. I'm sure, right? Like the actual library where you rent books. Indigo will certainly have a version of it, right? It is everywhere, right? So even if I didn't order it, you'll find some version of it somewhere. Yeah, definitely. All right.